Hey there, viewers. Private chefs are trained to stay quiet, no matter how strange the request. But now, one who worked the infamous white parties has finally broken his silence. What Diddy and Oprah asked him to cook wasn't just unusual, it was deeply unsettling. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The job offer I should have refused. I still remember the way the heat curled up from the pan that morning, like it was trying to whisper something to me through the steam. The hotel kitchen was alive, like always, metallic clinks and sharp blades singing through herbs, the hiss of butter hitting cast iron, the heartbeat rhythm of ticket printers spitting out room orders in red ink. We moved like dancers back there, choreographed by stress and habit. I'd been working that line for 6 years. Sous chef for the big names on Ocean Drive, the ones who thought salt was optional and saffron was mandatory. It wasn't glamorous, it was sweat and aching arches and burns that never healed right. But it was mine. I had fought my way up from peeling potatoes in a dive joint off I-95 to plating for billionaires who never looked me in the eye. I didn't mind. I liked the routine. I liked how food made sense when nothing else did. You follow the steps, you get the dish. The end. That's why the man in the charcoal gray suit threw me off so bad. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not in the kitchen. Not in that part of the hotel. We don't get visitors down there. Only deliveries, and those show up in crates. But there he was, standing perfectly still between the dish pit and the spice rack, like he'd been printed into the room. Not sweating, not blinking, just waiting. I paused with a carving knife in one hand and a bus tub of basil in the other. He didn't flinch, just gave me this small nod, like he'd already made a decision. "You're Miss underscore, 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 underscore?" he asked. He said my name with certainty, not a question. I nodded. I didn't like that he knew it. "You come highly recommended. My employer's in need of someone discreet, detail-oriented, able to work outside the boundaries of traditional kitchen environments." I didn't say anything. I just blinked the sweat from my eyes. "The position pays triple your current wage," he continued. "Private events, travel included, short notice expected, long hours guaranteed, compliance training provided." That last part stuck with me. Compliance training, not food safety. Not recipe briefings, compliance. I wiped my hands on my apron, not because they were dirty, but because they suddenly felt cold. I should have walked away then. I should have gone back to the grill station, to the smell of charred steak and comfort in repetition. But I didn't. "When?" I asked. He smiled just a little. It wasn't friendly. It was satisfied. "There's a car waiting outside." I didn't pack a bag. He told me I wouldn't need to. "Everything will be arranged," he said. And somehow, it was. The car was black and silent. The driver wore gloves and didn't speak. I watched palm trees whip past the window as we left South Beach behind, the ocean fading in the rear view like a memory I hadn't earned. We stopped at a low building near the airport. It didn't have a sign, just a frosted glass door and a keypad. Inside was colder than it should have been. Not air conditioning, something else. Like the temperature dropped because the people inside wanted it that way. They led me to a room with no windows and a single table. There was a man already seated on the far side, hands folded, a folder in front of him. He didn't get up. "Sit," he said, without looking at me. I did. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately, like he wanted me to hear every shift of paper against paper. "We're not interested in your culinary background," he began. "Your portfolio's already been vetted. What we want to know is how well you forget." That was the first time I considered that this wasn't about food. He started asking questions, but not the kind I'd ever heard in an interview before. Have you ever been asked to serve food in a room where something felt wrong? Can you recall the names of every guest at every event you've catered in the last 5 years? Have you ever felt afraid in the presence of a meal you prepared? I didn't know how to answer. I said no, but he wrote something down anyway. Then he handed me a single page, a contract, an NDA technically, but the language was strange, more like scripture than legalese. One line was underlined in red ink. You are not preparing food, you are preparing presents. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he passed me a small black keycard and a sealed folder. I opened it. Inside, in large block letters, were just 3 words. White only emit. That's when I should have stood up. That's when every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But I didn't. I thought about my rent, my overdue car note, the stack of bills with my name circled in red. I thought about how hard I'd worked to be more than invisible. So I signed. The man stood and pushed the chair in with mechanical precision. You'll be flying out in 2 hours, he said. A car will take you to the terminal. Your uniform will be waiting on board. Do not speak to the crew. Do not speak unless spoken to. And above all else, do not ask questions during rehearsal. Rehearsal? He left before I could speak. The drive to the terminal felt longer than it probably was. The sun was setting by then, throwing long shadows across the tarmac. The jet was waiting, sleek, windowless, the kind of plane you don't see on commercial listings. The stairs were down, no crew in sight. I stepped inside. It was dead silent. Cream leather seats, no signage, no pilots in view. My name was never said again. There was a small envelope on the seat nearest the window. It was blank. Inside, a room key and another piece of paper. This one only said, "Do not open the kitchen doors until the sound stops." I sat in silence as the jet taxied and lifted. No announcements, no welcome. Just me. And that moment, sitting there alone in a soundproof sky, I realized I'd already crossed a line. Not because I didn't know what I was stepping into, but because I did. And I said yes anyway. The rooms without cameras. I don't know what I expected when the plane finally touched down. Maybe something recognizable. A luxury car, a valet in sunglasses, palm trees swaying with money in the air. But when the doors opened, there wasn't a soul in sight. Just fog rolling across a private tarmac and a single white van parked with its engine already running. The driver didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. I sat in the back, gripping the keycard in my pocket like it could explain what the hell I'd agreed to. We drove in silence up winding hills, far past where normal roads were supposed to end. I watched the city lights vanish behind us. The air thinned out and got colder. The trees looked unfamiliar, not like Florida at all, almost staged, too perfect in their symmetry. The mansion wasn't what I expected. It didn't sprawl wide like most of the estates I'd cooked in. It reached upward, 3 narrow towers connected by stone walkways, with one central building that looked more like a monastery than a home. Ivy crawled up the sides in deliberate patterns, shaped like spirals and diamonds. Everything was white. White gravel, white stone, white door. It didn't feel clean. It felt sterile. A woman met me at the door, slim, tall, and expressionless. Her white gloves were spotless. She didn't extend her hand. "I am assistant to the host," she said. "You will not need my name." She motioned for me to follow, and the door opened without a sound. No creak, no latch, just a soft inhale, like the house was breathing us in. Inside, the air was colder, not refrigerated, intentional, like the kind of cold you feel in a museum, where the artifacts aren't supposed to age. The walls were bone-colored, not quite white. not quite beige, and the floors absorbed sound. Every footstep felt like it disappeared into the silence. She led me down a long corridor lined with identical doors, each one without a knob. At the end, we turned into the kitchen. It was beautiful in the way hospitals are beautiful. Everything gleaming, untouched, without the smell of food or oil or life. Stainless steel counters, immaculate shelving, and the brightest overhead lights I'd ever seen. But something was missing. There were no knives, no cleavers, not even a paring blade. Only a row of vacuum-sealed pouches lined along the prep counter, each labeled not with ingredients, but emotions. Warmth, regret, submission, release. "What are these?" I asked before I could stop myself. The woman didn't look at them. "They are pre-selected elements," she said. "You will assemble, not improvise. Knife work is not permitted on this property. Precision is provided, not created." She walked over to the fridge and tapped it twice. It opened automatically. Inside, dozens more pouches, some with strange symbols printed instead of words. Spirals, mirrored numbers, what looked like fingerprints. There were no eggs, no milk, no meat. "Where are the—" "You will be guided." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway, her head tilted slightly to the side. "There are no clocks here. You will be summoned when it is time." "But how will I—" "You are not being watched," she said. "That does not mean you are alone." Then she disappeared into the hallway, the door closing behind her as silently as it had opened. I stood there for a long time, trying to orient myself in the space. My training told me to start checking appliances, making sure temperatures were correct, familiarizing myself with layout, but none of the controls had labels. The ovens turned on by gesture. The sink only dispensed water when you said the word "begin." The pantry was locked. I opened one of the pouches marked warmth. Inside was something viscous and amber-colored, smelling faintly of ginger and old paper. I couldn't tell if it was broth, syrup, or something else entirely. Footsteps broke the silence. I turned, expecting the assistant, but instead saw a line of 5 people entering through the side door. They wore matching linen uniforms, long white coats with no buttons and wide collars that folded like robes. None of them spoke. They moved to the center of the kitchen and formed a circle. One of them pulled out a small black device and pressed a button. A chime rang out, not mechanical, organic, like a bell inside someone's chest. Then they began moving. Not dancing, not walking. Something between the two. A fluid, rehearsed sequence, each step timed with the others. One lifted a glass tray and turned it upside down without letting anything fall. Another poured salt from one hand to the other in a perfect figure 8. None of them looked at me. I stood frozen, unsure if I was meant to join in or pretend I wasn't there. Then I heard them speak. "When she enters, place the sugar backwards. Do not speak if the man with the mirror approaches. Take it will be interpreted as memory. Coolness must be disguised as grief." I couldn't tell if they were reciting instructions or praying. The chime rang again. They stopped moving, turned in perfect unison, walked out. I tried to follow, but the door locked behind them. Alone again. I turned back to the workstation, my hands shaking slightly now. I looked again at the emotion-labeled pouches. Some were warm to the touch, some were cold. One of them, regret, vibrated faintly when I held it too long. I had never worked with ingredients that didn't tell me what they were. Even in the most experimental kitchens, even at the height of molecular gastronomy, you knew what you were cooking with. There were rules. You could break them, sure, but they were there. Here, there were no rules. Just rolls. That's when I noticed the laminated sheet tucked under the main prep counter. The rolls of service. The crown. The mother. The rhythm, the guest, the witness, the keeper. Underneath, a line scrawled in red ink. Names destroy continuity, roles preserve the meal. I read it again and again until the letters started to blur. I wasn't sure if it was hunger, fear, or both. Later, maybe an hour, maybe more, I heard footsteps again. This time, heavy. The door opened. He walked in. He wore a long, cream-colored robe with no logos, no shoes. His eyes scanned the kitchen like he was checking something that had already been checked 1,000 times. Then he stopped at the center island. There was a bowl of fruit there, untouched since I arrived. He picked up an apple. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small pouch of salt, dipped the apple in it, bit once, chewed slow. Didn't look at me. Then he turned and left. He didn't say a word. No one told me he would be there. No one told me he would come in without a sound. No entourage, no theatrics. Just silence. And that apple, and the soft crunch that still echoes in my head when I close my eyes. I stayed in the kitchen the rest of the night, afraid to leave. The lights never dimmed. The fridge hummed louder the longer I stared at it. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't even know what I'd say. Who do you call when the food isn't food, the rooms don't have cameras, and no one will tell you what you're cooking? I sat on the floor, holding the pouch labeled submission, waiting for the next sound. It never came. Chapter 3. Menu for the absentees. I didn't sleep the night before the event. I tried. They'd given me a cot in a side room behind the main pantry, a cold little space with no blankets and no door, just a velvet curtain with a spiral sewn into the center. I lay there listening to the soft hum of refrigeration units and something else beneath it, a sound I couldn't place, like fabric being stretched underwater. When the light above the prep station turned from white to a dull rose, I knew the day had begun. No one came to wake me. There was no announcement. Just that shift in color, like the house itself was breathing me forward. I stood up, bones stiff, knees sore from the floor. The stainless steel counters were already spotless again, like I hadn't touched them. There was no trace of the ingredients I had handled the day before. Not even the scent. But on the center island sat a new binder. White leather, no title, just a black elastic loop holding it closed. I opened it and read the menu. White Party, Absentee Sequence, version 3A. Purity Foam. Memory Reduction Soup. Silent Skillet. Plains Tartlets. Echo Crust. Submission Spread. The Mirror Dish. No descriptions, no portions, no guests listed. I turned the page. Each item had a pairing listed, not wine, but emotions. Purity Phone, served with curiosity. Memory Reduction Soup, served with amnesia. Silence Gilly, served with shame. Compliance Tartless, served with gratitude. Echo, crushed, served with recoil. Suspicion Spread, served with stillness. Mirror Dish, served with witness. There were no protein specs, no dietary notes, nothing remotely culinary by any standard I'd ever known. I stood there, fingers cold, trying to decide what the hell to do, when a quiet rustle interrupted my spiral. A white envelope slid under the prep room door. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The paper was heavier than normal, textured like parchment. Inside was a photo. The woman in the white gloves. She was smiling. The first time I'd ever seen her expression change. Standing beside her was a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, with the same white gloves and a white bow clipped behind her ear. Her face was half turned away. They were standing in front of a dessert cart. On the back of the photo, in perfect black script, it said, "She's ready for dessert." I don't know what made my stomach turn more. The message or the idea that someone knew I'd be the one to read it. I placed the photo back in the envelope, slid it under a baking sheet, and told myself to focus. The prep bins were restocked while I slept. I hadn't heard a sound, but everything was refilled. More emotion pouches, but now labeled with accompanying instructions. Armth, whip until stiff, do not taste. Regret. Simmer in silence, no metal utensils. Stillness, do not open until your breath evens. Witness, prepare under candlelight only. I reached for the foam stabilizer and started measuring. Whatever purity foam was supposed to be, it seemed to require 5 separate containers, none of which could touch each other during assembly. The recipe card didn't use measurements, just sensations. Fold until the color recalls clean sheets. Stop before it reminds you of paper. I lost track of time. The ovens beeped in strange tones, never repeating. The freezer whispered when I opened it, like something inside exhaled. At one point, I dropped a ramekin and bent down to grab it. When I stood back up, a second envelope was resting where I'd just been working. No sound, no shadow, just there. Inside, a second menu. Same courses, but with scribbled edits in red ink. No dairy, no light after course 3. Finish with the mirror dish. Do not speak during course 4 prep. If speech occurs, restart. If the guest requests substitution, decline with apology but no eye contact. I stared at the edits. The handwriting didn't match anything from the previous notes. Sharper, angrier, the kind of penmanship that made your skin feel like it was being read. Just as I placed the paper down, I heard the softest footsteps. Not heavy, just intentional. I turned. He was back. Diddy. In full white now. Not a robe like last time, but something almost ceremonial. A long tunic with sharp pleats and a white silk sash around his waist. He moved with no hesitation. No security. No staff. He walked up behind me and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. He didn't look at me. He smelled of gardenia and clean linen. Then he whispered, "The mother will watch you closely tonight." And just like that, he left. No questions, no instructions, just the whisper and the weight of it lingering longer than his touch. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just stood there, watching the phone deflate in its bowl. The stainless steel seemed to dull around me, like the shine had drained from the room. The idea that this was all for show, some private dinner party, some eccentric billionaire fantasy, that idea died right then. This wasn't backstage. I was the show. The kitchen was part of it, the lighting, the quiet, the repetition. I remembered one of the other chefs I'd trained with in the early years. He used to say kitchens were sacred spaces, altars to the act of nourishing. Even a plate of fries is a prayer, he once told me, so you better mean it. This didn't feel sacred. It felt staged. Worse, it felt observed. As I started assembling the memory reduction soup, I noticed something odd. I'd plated 3 bowls, identical, set them on the tray by the service door. I turned to prepare the next course. When I turned back, one was gone. No footsteps, no door sound, just missing. Checked the hallway. Empty. I checked the staff roster posted on the wall. Blank. I looked again at the pouches of ingredients. Witness was missing from the rack. I told myself I was tired, that someone had taken the dish as part of the process, that this was all some intricate production. But then I noticed something on the tray, where the bowl had been. A single white glove. Tiny. Child-sized. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I went back to cooking. Because that's what you do when you're already too deep to ask questions. You finish the menu. even if no one's there to eat it. Chapter 4. When they entered the dining hall, the bell was made of glass. No one ever told me that. I just knew when I heard it. A sound so pure it felt like it came from inside your own mouth, a tone you weren't ready to release. It rang out once, sharp and sudden, and every light in the kitchen shifted from white to something colder. Pale blue, almost surgical. That was the signal. It was time. The doors beyond the prep line opened on their own. No one came to get me. No instructions were delivered, but I knew what I was supposed to do. Stand behind the one-way mirror, hands folded, apron clean, eyes forward. I was not to speak, not to move. Not until the bell rang again. I took my place at the edge of the kitchen's viewing corridor. There were no chairs, just a narrow hallway lined with frosted glass, and behind it the dining hall revealed itself like a stage play viewed from backstage. Except the actors weren't acting. They were following something deeper. They entered in silence. One by one, barefoot, gliding across the polished black floor in robes the color of unbleached paper. Each guest moved as if choreographed. Heads bowed, arms slightly out, palms turned up like offering plates. Their feet made no sound. The only noise in the room was the rustling of fabric and the gentle shift of weight against stone. I counted 12 guests. Each took their seat with perfect synchronicity, the same mannered motion, the same calm breath before settling their hands on the table. No one pulled out their chair. They didn't have to. The chairs seemed to move with them. Then came the 13th. A woman, wheeled in on a silver mirrored tray, her body stiff, mouth closed. Not bound, not drugged, just still. Too still. A man followed behind her, not pushing the tray, just shadowing her every step. He mirrored her posture, her blinking, the twitch of her mouth. He was dressed identically, same length of robe, same folds, but she never turned to look at him. They wheeled her to the center of the table and left her there. 2 empty chairs remained. One at the head, one at the foot. First he arrived. Diddy, clothed in absolute white, stepped in with slow, deliberate cadence. His presence didn't disturb the silence. If anything, the room seemed to adjust itself to accommodate him, as if everything else was waiting for him to set the rhythm. He didn't look around. He knew where his seat was. He sat down and folded his hands. Then she entered. The mother. No one called her that. No one called her anything at all. But I knew. We all knew. She wore white as well, but hers shimmered faintly, like silk that remembered water. Her face was calm. Too calm. Not gentle, not cruel, just blank, like a vessel. She didn't acknowledge the guests. She walked with her hands clasped behind her back and her chin raised, eyes set straight ahead. She took her seat. That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Like a current passed through the room. The guests didn't flinch, but I saw the tips of their fingers curl inward. I saw one guest gently bite the inside of their cheek until blood bloomed between their lips. But no one moved. The silent butler emerged from the far end of the dining hall, pale, tall, and expressionless. He wheeled in the first course on a matte black cart. Purity foam. I watched him lift each plate with slow, almost reverent movements, placing the small, pale mounds in front of each guest. No garnish, no sauce, just the foam, gently quivering in the center of the glass dish. The guests did not eat. They leaned forward, inhaled, then leaned back, all in the same motion. The second course came next. Memory reduction soup, served cold in silver cups. No spoons were provided. Some guests sipped. Others only held the cups to their temples, eyes closed. One woman pressed her fingers into the broth and dabbed a drop behind her ears. No one chewed, no one spoke. I wanted to turn away, to blink, to look at anything else, but I couldn't. The mirror wouldn't let me. I was sure of that. It had something to show me. Course after course was served. Silence gele came in translucent cubes which melted before they were ever touched. The scent of it filled the room with something metallic and floral, like orchids soaked in blood. A man at the far end of the table started to tremble as soon as the gele was placed in front of him. His mouth moved, but no sound came. His hands shook until he clenched them in his lap. Compliance tartlets were the first dish that looked familiar. Golden crusts, delicately shaped, filled with a cream that glowed faintly under the dining hall's light. But no one ate theirs. Instead, they passed them to the left, each guest cradling the tartlet in both hands before offering it to the next. A circle of silent gratitude, or maybe obedience. At course 4, the shift began. The guest nearest the woman on the mirrored tray began to cry. Not loudly, not with shaking shoulders, just tears, steady and unbroken, flowing down his face. He didn't move to wipe them. He stared at his plate, echo crust, a dish I'd made from hardened burnt sugar and crushed ice, and let the salt from his tears drip into it. By course 6, something cracked. A young man, thin and bare-legged beneath his robe, slapped himself across the face once, then again, and again. "It's not your flavor," he whispered. "It's hers." I turned away for the first time, heart racing, and saw my own reflection in the glass wall. My face looked wrong, paler, whiter, my eyes too large. The kitchen behind me was clean, untouched, but something in the reflection shifted. The prep station was no longer set. The pouches were open. The labels were missing. I felt dizzy. When the butler brought out dessert, I braced myself. It was the mirror dish, a spun sugar sculpture shaped like a broken key. No two were identical. Each guest received a slightly different shard, some jagged, some almost whole. The guests held them like relics. Then the lights flickered, once, then dimmed completely. Only the soft candlelight from the centerpiece remained, and someone was behind me. I didn't hear the door. I didn't hear footsteps. I just felt the air shift, the temperature drop, and then her breath just over my shoulder. "I told you not to serve too much memory." It was her, the woman from the photo. But she wasn't wearing gloves now. Her hands were bare, trembling, wet. I turned to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. A sharp pain flared in my palm. I looked down. Blood. A thin cut across my lifeline. Had I grabbed something, dropped a dish? I didn't remember cutting myself. I didn't remember moving at all. She stepped closer, reached toward the mirror, tapped it once, and the image inside went dark, like the guests were never there. "Service ends when she forgets," she said softly. "You made her remember." Then she walked out. I stood in silence, hand bleeding, heart pounding. I reached for the prep towel tucked into my apron, but it was gone. In its place, a single white glove. Still, Chapter 5. What they asked me to do with the leftovers. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up bent over the prep table, cheek pressed against cold steel, the imprint of the key-shaped sugar dish still etched into my skin. My hands were sticky. My apron smelled like salt and burnt citrus. The kitchen lights had gone dim again, but it wasn't night anymore. The light wasn't black or blue. It was that hazy, bruised gray that only happens just before dawn, the kind of sky that doesn't know if it wants to be morning or morning. The bell hadn't rung. No one came to get me. The kitchen was silent except for the low groan of the refrigeration units kicking on and off like they were breathing unevenly. But when I stood up, when I finally turned my eyes toward the floor, The message had already arrived. 3 dens. They'd been rolled in while I slept. Stainless steel, deep as coffins, each one labeled with black vinyl letters across the top. Reflected in just a witness. There were no instructions, just a tray placed beside them, where the remains of every untouched course had been laid out again, still steaming, impossibly, as if the event had ended only seconds ago. Nothing was rotting. Nothing had cooled. Every slice, smear, crumble of foam and glay was preserved like it was caught in time. I picked up the tartlet first. It still vibrated faintly in the center. I wasn't sure where to put it. It hadn't been eaten, but it had been passed, held, witnessed, reflected. My hands trembled. One of the silent servers appeared without announcement, dressed the same as before, but now he wore black gloves. He didn't speak, just walked to the tray, picked up a pouch I hadn't seen before, and held it out to me. Yours 3, unzerified. It was sealed tightly. He handed me a matchbook and pointed out the back door. "Fire pit," he said, the first words I'd heard in hours. "Burn completely, then close the lid." Carried it out with both hands. The garden was more like a clearing. It had that artificial feel to it. No weeds, no bugs, no dew, just white stones arranged in perfect spirals. At the center was a low basin, steel and blackened by age. A small pile of charred remains smoldered inside, but I couldn't tell if they were wood or something else. I struck the match and held it to the corner of the pouch. The flame caught faster than I expected, almost hungrily. It hissed, not like paper, not like meat, like fabric soaked in memory. The scent that came off it was wrong, sweet but hollow, like perfume applied to a corpse. I didn't look away, not even when the flame curled into the shape of a face, just for a moment, before disappearing into smoke. When it was done, I lowered the iron lid. It locked with a click, and something inside me shuddered with it. That's when I saw him, standing just beyond the edge of the trees, one of the guests, still wearing his white robe, just still barefoot, watching. His face was blank, but his eyes, I don't know how to describe them. They weren't angry, they weren't afraid, they were stuck. Like someone had hit pause on his soul. He didn't move, not once, not when I stared at him, not when I took a step forward. I blinked, and he was gone. I walked back into the kitchen, heart thudding, fingers ash-stained. Inside the walk-in freezer, something caught my eye. A single tray sitting on the top shelf, not sealed, not labeled like the others, just a small piece of masking tape along the side. Memory reversal, preserved. I pulled it down carefully, my breath already fogging the air around me. It was a dish I hadn't seen in decades. A small bowl of lemon rice, just like my grandmother used to make back in our apartment above the laundromat. The kind with burnt edges, too much mustard seed, and curry leaves floating in just a touch of oil. I hadn't tasted it in years, hadn't even thought about it. But there it was, exact in every detail. Except the bowl was white porcelain, not chipped ceramic, and there was a single glove folded neatly beside it. I felt something collapse inside me. Not break, collapse. I took the tray back to the prep table and stared at it for a long time. Then I turned and walked down the hall, deeper into the heart of the house, past the dining room, past the staging corridor, until I found her, the assistant in white gloves. She was standing in front of a tall mirror mounted on the wall, not looking at herself, just standing there, arms at her sides. I didn't announce myself. I didn't speak gently. "What is this?" I demanded, voice cracking. She didn't answer. "You sent me the tray, that dish. You knew. How did you know?" She turned, slowly. "It was never about the food," she said, voice clear for the first time. "You were the course." I stepped back, my spine brushing against cold plaster. "The crowd liked how you prepared grief," she added. The hallway seemed to stretch behind her as she spoke, like space was peeling itself open. Her gloves had small red dots on them now. I hadn't noticed them before. "You think you're feeding them," she continued, "but they're the ones feeding on you. Not the body, the ache, the echo, the part of you you gave up the first time someone told you no one would care if you quit." I couldn't breathe. "Your menu isn't on the wall," she whispered. "It's in you. We've only been writing it down." Then she walked past me, without looking back. That night, I tried to sleep. I laid on the cot in the pantry, the velvet curtains still closed, the imprint of my own breath fogging against the steel prep door beside me. I dreamt of the long table. This time, I wasn't behind the glass. I was seated at the head. My hands were folded neatly in front of me. My reflection in the mirrored table was dressed all in white. A plate was placed in front of me, the lemon rice steaming gently. Across from me sat the child from the photo, her hands in her lap, eyes staring at the ceiling. The other guests weren't guests anymore. They were all versions of me. Younger, older, burned, worn out, wearing chef coats stained with dishes I hadn't made yet. They looked at me like they were waiting for something. Opened my mouth to speak, but what came out was a gasp, all of air, of recognition, and then the bell rang. Again, and again. Chapter 6, The Kitchen Below the Kitchen. It started with a flicker, just a brief dimming of the overhead lights. Nothing dramatic, no bang of thunder, no howling wind. Just the kind of momentary shift in power that made you blink twice and wonder if you'd imagined it. But then the lights went out completely. Not a slow fade, not a surge and pop. Just gone. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the dark. I stood motionless at the prep station, still wearing the same apron from the night before, half covered in drying sugar and sweat. The scent of gardenia still clung to my sleeves from when Diddy brushed past me. It was stronger now, like the flower was blooming in reverse. Sweet at first, then sour, like something rotting behind a wall. The emergency lights didn't come on. I waited. 1 minute. Then 2. No footsteps, no radio, no backup. I knew from orientation that there was a generator somewhere on the property, but I hadn't been told where. That was someone else's job, someone higher up. But they weren't here now. So I grabbed the utility flashlight taped to the inside of the prep fridge, the kind that every chef keeps hidden just in case, and started moving. The hallways outside the kitchen looked wrong without light. The walls stretched longer, like they were breathing in, and my steps echoed louder than they should have. I passed the dining room doors, now closed, the long mirrored surface inside catching just enough of my beam to reflect dozens of eyes that weren't mine. I didn't look back. I turned toward the pantry. I figured if there was any place to start, it was the storage. Maybe someone had kept old schematics, maybe I'd find a fuse box or a switchboard. Anything to bring the lights back. But when I opened the door to the pantry, the first thing I saw wasn't supplies. It was the wall, or what I thought was a wall. Because when I stepped inside, brushing past rows of sealed emotion pouches and bags of flour marked with code names instead of expiration dates, I noticed that one of the shelves didn't cast a proper shadow. The light from my flashlight stopped abruptly at the edge, like the beam itself was afraid to keep going. I reached forward and knocked. "Olive." The shelf swung inward with a hiss of old hinges. Behind it, a staircase. Narrow, stone-lined, steep, the kind of stairs that belong to castles or cellars where people aren't supposed to return from. I should have closed the door. I should have turned around. But my body moved before my brain caught up. Each step I took downward felt colder than the last, like I was descending into a place where time had thinned out. The air smelled ancient, dust and copper and something sweet, a sweetness that didn't comfort. It clung to the back of my throat like syrup gone rancid. Oh. At the bottom of the stairs, I found another kitchen. Older, narrower, but still functional. The counters were made of wood, warped and splintered from age. The oven was cast iron, its surface blackened by decades of heat. Hanging above the prep area were hooks, dozens of them, empty, but swaying lightly as if recently disturbed. Someone had been here. Recently, there were photos pinned to the walls, yellowed at the corners, some in black and white, others faded to sepia. Every photo showed a chef, men, women, a few whose features were blurred, faces caught mid-motion. Most of them had X's drawn through their eyes in thick red ink. But some were untouched, preserved. Below each photo, a card, not in the heat, a dish. Reduction of silence, approved. Witness glaze, overdone. Shane crisp, spoiled. Grief broth, elegant. The worst part? One of the photos was me. Not the May from this week. The me from 10 years ago. Bigger, thinner, wearing a chef coat I hadn't owned in years. No X over my eyes. It's just a note below. Promising, memory still intact. I stumbled backward, flashlight beam jittering across the room until it landed on the center table. White, marble, stained faintly in places where something had seeped in permanently. There were no chairs, just the table, and at the center of it, a glass dome. I moved closer, unable to stop myself. The dome was fogged over. Something moved beneath it, slow, twitching, irregular. I wiped the condensation away and saw. I still don't know what I saw. A small, curled shape, like a child's hand but boneless. It flexed once, as if reaching for the light. Behind me, a voice spoke. She liked what you made. I turned. An old man stood in the corner, dressed in the same linen as the servers upstairs, but his face was weathered, beard gone gray. His eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me. So now you'll make it again, he said. And again, until she's full. He raised one hand and pointed toward the dome. Start with what you lost. I backed away, heart pounding, flashlight shaking. I didn't lose anything, I whispered, even though I didn't believe it. He smiled. No, but she did. I ran. Back up the stairs, back through the pantry, through the walls that now felt too narrow, too wrong. But when I emerged into the kitchen, the one I knew, the one I had worked in for nights that now felt like lifetimes, something had changed. Everything was reversed. The counters were flipped, the burners now on the opposite side, the freezer door now opened inward instead of outward. My prep notes were written in reverse script. The sink handle turned counterclockwise to produce hot. I turned to the wall where I always posted the sequence menu. A new sheet was pinned there, handwritten, fresh. Tonight. Memory. Self. Underneath it, he remembers the wrong way. The oven was lit, but no one had turned it on. I opened my notebook, the one I'd used since the first night. Dozens of pages, recipes I'd scrawled out in panic, ingredient substitutions, measurements. But the handwriting wasn't mine. Or rather, it was, but not now, not the way I wrote. It looked like a copy of my writing from years ago, stiffer, neater. Before I'd developed muscle memory, the notes were things I didn't recall writing. Add more reflection, subtract witness, reheat when she smiles. Page after page of instructions I couldn't remember following, but had. I dropped the book, My fingers felt numb. In the reflection of the oven door, I saw someone watching me. But when I turned, the kitchen was empty. I opened the freezer to try and ground myself, maybe just breathe. But there, on the top shelf, sat a fresh tray. Another dish I hadn't made. One I used to make as a child, alone, when my mother worked double shifts and forgot to cook. Cold toast soaked in milk and sugar. Labeled early AdSense, reduced slowly. I closed the door, locked it, sat down on the floor and stared at my hands. They were stained with something dark and sweet. I don't remember touching anything, but the smell lingered. And the gloves on the hook above the prep table were now my size. Chapter 7. The session meal. No one told me it was the last one. There was no bell, no summons, no change in the lights. Just a note left under my cutting board, written in something that looked like charcoal. Returning. One final session, no menu. That was all. The kitchen hadn't fully returned to normal since the storm. Some drawers opened the wrong way. The sink still hissed when no one was near it. One of the pantry doors had vanished entirely, just blank wall where a hinge used to be. I didn't question it. I didn't question anything anymore. My body moved before my brain did. I'd started thinking in portions. In garnish, in silence. Around noon, or what I assumed was noon, a masked butler wheeled in a single black crate. No eye contact, no introduction. He left it by the center island and walked away, disappearing behind the mirrored service door. The crate was marked only with the word "retrieved" in heavy block print. He opened it. Inside were ingredients I didn't recognize, some I couldn't even name. A pouch of what looked like powdered rust, a single white onion wrapped in lace, 4 sprigs of something that smelled like chalk and orange peel, a sealed dish of thick amber paste with a texture somewhere between marrow and wax, and a bottle. No label, just a cork and a piece of string tied around its neck with a small charm. A spoon bent backwards. No directions, no measurements. Just memory, because as soon as I touched the paste, I felt something. A flash of laughter. Women in white gowns. A child humming beneath a long oak table. Dishes clattering far away. The sound of someone being told to smile, even when it doesn't taste right. Another flash, sharper. Diddy, younger, smirking, holding a plate with something red and slippery on it. Oprah, or who they called the mother, leaning in close to someone's ear, whispering, "This one's still fresh." I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been there, but I remembered it. I tried to write down a recipe, something to anchor myself, but my hand wouldn't cooperate. The letters came out in circles, then shapes, then a spiral that filled the entire page. I dropped the pen. I turned to the ingredients, let instinct, or whatever this was now, guide me. The powder became a rub, the wax paste a glaze, the onion halved and roasted until its lace burned away into nothing. The bottle. I didn't open it, I just let the cork breathe. The smell that drifted up made my mouth water and my knees go weak. It smelled like 2003, like the back seat of a car filled with fast food bags, like the feeling of calling someone who doesn't answer anymore. It smelled like before. I plated everything on deep black velvet squares. No china, no silver, just fabric. The kind of fabric you'd find lining a casket or a memory box. As I worked, I began to hum. I didn't recognize the tune, but it calmed me. It felt circular, like something that had no start or end, like I was repeating something from deep inside myself. When the last plate was finished, I stood still. No one came to collect them. Then the wall light blinked red. "Deliver yourself." That's what it said on the service screen. I didn't know the screen could even display messages. I hadn't touched it in days, weeks. I carried the tray with both hands. My fingers had stopped shaking. My head was clear, too clear, like someone had pressed pause on my fear just long enough to let me complete the ritual. The dining hall doors opened at my touch. The room was empty. Utterly. Chairs pushed in, candles unlit. No hum of breathing, no rustle of linen. But in the mirrored wall beside the table, it was full. Every seat taken. The woman from the tray, the child, the guests, the ones who never blinked. Even the man who'd slapped himself. And at each end, Diddy and the mother. They didn't move, but their reflections watched me. Stepped forward, slowly. My shoes made no sound on the tile. I moved to the head of the table and placed the first velvet plate down. The mirror showed a guest reaching for it. I plated the next, and the next, until the entire table was set. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A voice, close, like it was spoken into the back of my neck. "You're not done." And I froze. Turned around. Empty, still empty. But the mirror the guests were eating now, not all at once, not neatly. They were tearing the food apart, sinking fingers into sauces, smearing the glaze on their necks. One guest sobbed while licking the onion pulp. Another drank straight from the plate. A third crumbled the velvet into their hands and chewed on it like bread. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't open. I raised my hands to knock and saw the gesture. Fingers outstretched, palms down, wrists limp. A serving gesture. The same one I'd seen the silent servers use the first night, when they moved in circles and recited those strange lines. I couldn't stop doing it. Even now, even with the dining room empty and the mirror going black, I stood in the silence, arms suspended like a puppet waiting for the next string to pull. And somewhere behind me, I swear I heard the kitchen stove turn on again. Chapter 8. I wrote this with her fork. I don't remember leaving. People ask me that sometimes. The few who know, the ones who speak in sealed rooms and don't record the interviews. They say, "Do you remember how you got out?" And I always tell them the same thing. No. There was no car, no plane, no bell this time. One morning I just woke up in a motel off a highway I don't recognize. Pale green curtains, cigarette burns on the nightstand. The kind of place that forgets you faster than you forget it. I'd been gone 3 days before I noticed the fork. It was buried at the bottom of my prep bag, the same one I'd brought with me when I left the hotel kitchen. At least I think it was the same one. The tag had my name, but the stitching had changed. My initials were sewn in gold now, not white. The fork didn't belong to me. Heavy, silver, engraved with a faint spiral along the handle. Familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. It had weight, the kind of weight that holds onto you when you sleep. And when I held it to paper, not the pronged end, but the stem, it wrote. Not ink, not graphite. It scratched, it pressed, and the page darkened where I touched it. The words came out without friction, without resistance, like it had something to say. So I let it speak. The man who visited me yesterday, he didn't say his name, just sat across from me, flipped open a folder, and whispered, "She might still be watching. Say only what you remember, no more, no less." He meant the mother. He never said it. But I knew. I told him what I could. That the meals weren't real meals. That the guests didn't eat to taste, they ate to remember or to forget. That the kitchen wasn't backstage, it was the stage. Every cut I made, every fold of foam, every timed motion. It wasn't mine. I don't think it ever was. He asked me if I believed Diddy orchestrated it. I told him Diddy wasn't the conductor. He was the rehearsal, just like the rest of us. He leaned in close then, close enough I could see the tiny spiral-shaped pin on his lapel. It was white on silver, the same design that had been carved into the freezer drawer back at the estate. I didn't mention that. I just watched it shimmer. He asked if I had anything to submit, something physical, so I gave him the fork. He didn't touch it, just looked at it like it might blink. "This is hers?" he asked. "No," I said. "She never claimed anything. It just stayed. I haven't slept since. The motel is quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like someone's removed all the normal noise. Even the ice machine doesn't hum. There's no mirror in the bathroom. Just a patch of wall where it should be, as if it was never installed. I've started writing on the wallpaper. There's no paper left. I didn't bring a journal, just this pen the motel gave me and the last scraps of myself. I use the fork when the pen won't cooperate. It works better anyway. Some of the words come out reversed. Not mirrored, reversed, like the thought was walking backward out of my skull and I only caught its footprints. The words I don't remember writing. Someone crossed them out. I don't know who, it's not my hand. But the pressure marks are still fresh. And tried to tear out one of the strips I'd written on, to throw it away. It stuck to my fingers. Wouldn't let go. When I finally ripped it off, it left a red mark on my palm shaped like a spoon. Tonight I heard someone knock on the door. Just once. I didn't answer. I looked through the peephole. It went. But when I opened the door, slow and quiet, the hallway was still. Except for one thing. The tray. Sitting just outside the door. Velvet-lined. A single dish. Lemon rice. Steam curling like a hand reaching for mine. Note. No explanation. Just the smell of my childhood. And something else beneath it. Gardenia. I closed the door. But not all the way. Just enough to hear the hallway breathe. I think I've finished this testimony. I think it's done. But the name at the bottom doesn't feel right anymore. The hand that wrote it? Not mine. It looks like hers. Still steady. Still polite. Just quieter. I sign off now with what the fork gave me. Witness, Meal 47C.